Case closed. The mystery of numbers and shapes. I believe that's the translation. I think I machine translated it. And I think case closed is the official translation. This is my translation of the title. But, Detective Conan anime series, long-running anime series. But I got this game recently for the SEGA Beena. And if you don't know, the SEGA Beena is essentially a SEGA Pico. It's called the Advanced Pico is its alternative name. And so it's very much a system for toddlers. So these are video games aimed at very young children. And, they leverage a variety of anime licenses. In this case, it's Case Closed or Detective Conan, basically. And it is important to note that when you play these games, there's not necessarily a formal progression to them. They are book-based video games that you basically flip the pages, and those take you to different set pieces and things like that. So this game in particular basically focuses on a variety of math, recognition, and kind of like spot the difference kind of puzzles. And so each page you're on basically launches about 3 to 4 different mini games that have you solve different puzzles and things like that. They're super easy generally, and the hardest part about this is not knowing Japanese, because I don't necessarily know the instructions for some of these, but once you figure it out, you can generally figure out that it's like, hey, this is about counting certain numbers of things, or counting certain objects, or identifying certain shapes and colors and objects and words. Again, very like toddler kind of Blue's Clues kind of stuff, as a game. So your expectations for what this game is, I think, have to be very much confined to that thing. And, as an adult man, I can solve these problems easy enough once I actually know what they are. So there's kind of 2 major aspects of this game. The second one's a little kind of straightforward. So I want to start with the first one, which is the game structure. So as I mentioned, this is a book, and you are flipping between the pages. And because of that, you can flip to the final page basically at any point. And so what that means is there's really no real winning aspect to this game. So it in some way is back to more traditional media, right? I mean, you can open the final page of any book in your life and read it and be like, that's the end, right? But that's not really how it's meant to be consumed. It is something that is meant to be followed page by page. But, maybe a little bit more wiggle room because, a kid could maybe turn the page however they want, right? And so you're going through each of these pages. They show you different set pieces. The kids are basically solving different, mysteries around different areas like theme parks, or they're like in a library on a school computer. And all these mini games are basically based around these different set pieces. And you can kind of click the different characters, and they'll have different voice lines and have a little bit of flavor dialogue and things like that. But what this game does is when you get to the final page of the book, there is a final series of puzzles that are basically referencing all the past puzzles that you have done and then timing you. So it almost feels like this test at the end where you're kind of being tested to like, how good of a detective are you? I don't know if that's how they present it, but kind of what it feels like, where it's like you're going to do like 10 or 15 mini games, and each of these are going to be on a timer. So you need to be able to solve these problems quickly. And you also can't mess up generally as well, or else you'll fail that challenge kind of thing. And I think you have to pass. I think it's like maybe, I don't know the number for sure, but I'm going to guess probably the majority of the puzzles for them to be like, cool, you did it. Awesome. Congratulations, 3-year-old kid. kind of thing. But I think it's kind of interesting that, because there is no structure to this game, there is, despite there being no structure to this game, there is this like very climactic feeling that happens that if you follow the book page by page, you get to this final test, and it does feel like you are kind of tackling this challenge in a way that is like, all of this is kind of building up to this point, even if it's not necessarily, presented as that per se. I don't know if it's like in the game presenting as like we're back at home base solving the puzzle or whatever, or if it's just like, hey, I don't know, we're hanging around, do a bunch of these puzzles or something like that. There's not really a mystery here, I will say, or at least on paper. There is like, I think the final page, there is a police car on it. So I don't know, maybe there is some epiphany they come to. But, I don't understand Japanese enough to really be able to understand what's being said verbally. And most of the machine translated stuff with like the camera used for like the actual dialogue and things like that. So I think that's like kind of interesting to look at and think about. Some of this I think applies to the SEGA Beena as a whole, but seeing games kind of built around this concept and how they kind of, still recognize the fact that there probably should be this kind of like final element that is like a satisfying final test to this game, despite, you as the player having full control over where you go at what point. Remember I'm going to bring this up, and I'm not going to edit this out. Remember the Alone in the Dark game with a DVD menu on the Wii 360 and PS3? Ben, I'm not letting you edit this out. I'm just saying that that's there, reminding people, has nothing to do with this. Anyways, I'm not editing it out. Ben, I'm going to commit a crime against you if you do it. Commit crimes against myself. Anyways, back on topic. But the Sega Beena, I'm not really sure of the hardware capabilities. I believe the original Sega Pico was like very much like a Sega Genesis in terms of like what it was capable of. This is a system released in like the early 2000s, and I think it went on to like the early 2010s. And it's definitely limited hardware. It's all 2D assets and things like that. And I would say generally it feels like it is probably in line with what a 2D game on maybe like the Sega Saturn would look like. I don't know what hardware's inside and what its capabilities truly are. But, it is visually, I think, a very nice looking game overall. These are very well done pieces of pixel art of all these Detective Conan characters. And, a lot of this art is reflective of the pages in the book. So there's these kind of large set pieces with high quality art, things like that. The Beena is running over like composite cables and things like that. And the audio for sure is really grungy in a way that like, it's understandable. Don't get me wrong, but it definitely feels like a system that is not capable of like full CD audio or something like that. But, these are tiny cartridges like basically embedded in books as well. So there's not a lot of physical space, and I have no idea how much like, actual storage space there is on them as well. But, as somebody who has not played a Beena, I wasn't really sure what to expect, but I think visually it all comes together very well, and it's fun to look at. And I think if you are like a curious Detective Conan fan, it's at least like maybe just flipping through some visuals of what's in there and just seeing how the game looks. But, it's definitely a game made for toddlers. But I was just really impressed by, I think, by the fact that it did recognize that the need for some kind of end challenge, despite there being no real structure and format. Again, it may be a Sega Beena thing in general that I'm just like, is standard process, but just thought I'd bring that up. So.